Hello, my name is Rodney. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is May 7th of 1983. I'm one of these people that came in this program under duress. I was in a hospital suffering from a gunshot wound that was given to me by a police officer, somebody that I put in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. My last drunk was not pretty. My first meeting was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at the bottom of the hospital in the cafeteria of the hospital I was in. I was escorted by two police officers, and they were there to get me sober because I needed to go to jail. So my last drunk consisted of me burning my house down, picking up a 3.5-foot piece of curb, dropping it on my buddy's face a couple of times, and severing the spinal cord on a police officer. And I wasn't a nice guy. I didn't come in here to get sober. I didn't want to be sober when I got here. I was 21 years old. I was in the military. I rode Navy submarines for a living, and I drank. And that's been the story of my life. I started drinking when I was 12 years old. My drinking career lasted 9 years, from the age of 12 until the age of 21. I come from an abusive family. My dad was an over-the-road truck driver. My mother was a submissive mom. We had 7 kids in our family. Too many kids, not enough money, too many problems. What I did was I drank. Continued to drink straight out of school. I threw a high school principal out of a second-story window. I did all kinds of stuff. I was charged with involuntary manslaughter at the age of 14. I had a guy that, while I was drunk and intoxicated and hitchhiking, that he decided that he wanted to try to make me perform oral sex on him, and I stabbed him in the thigh. My life, growing up, was difficult, and I made it more difficult because I didn't want to change me. I was, at the age of 13, I was 6'4", I weighed 200 pounds. I thought I knew everything about life. I was forced to join the service at the age of 16. I was told that I was either going to go to reform school or I was going to go to jail, or I could join the military. And at 16 years old, I forced my parents to sign a federal document saying that I was 17, and I joined in the United States Navy at the age of 16. And I drank. I found out the Navy would cover my butt no matter what I did, and I drank, and I used drugs, and I hurt people. And I did all kinds of stuff. And I did all of that coming into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to talk about a long history about drinking or drugging or anything like that, but I do know this. The way I was living my life, I was not going to live my life too much longer. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was the most boringest place I've ever been in my life. There was a bunch of old gray-headed guys that didn't have their own teeth, and they sat around this round table, and where I got sober at in Norfolk, Virginia. And they were happy, and they were laughing, and they were joking, and they were eating cookies and pies. And they were the most miserable people I ever seen in my life. They told me stupid stuff like, if you're going to come in here and you're going to sit in the back of the room, you might as well wash coffee cups and ashtrays until you decide that you want to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to wash coffee cups and ashtrays, but I had to get this piece of paper signed for the court. I had to be in 4 AA meetings every single day. And I had to have this piece of paper signed from the courts and my lawyers and the Navy. And I sat there, and I walked in these rooms, and it was like, none of this stuff applies to me. I just got caught. And I can go to jail, but I've been to jail before. I can survive in chaos. But I didn't know how to survive myself. And they told me to keep coming back. Every time I walked in, they welcomed me, and they handed me a cup of coffee. They told me to sit down and shut my mouth. They told me I didn't know anything. And I stayed in this program one day too long. I walked up to this round table at the Easy Does It Club in Norfolk, Virginia, and I asked this old timer, I said, how do I stay sober knowing I'm going to go to jail? How am I going to stay sober knowing that I'm going to lose my wife? How am I going to stay sober knowing that I'm not going to see my kids? How am I going to stay sober when I'm so freaking angry? They told me to sit down and shut up. They took a big book. They opened it up. And they said, they opened the big book up, and they said this to the very first, just open up the cover, and there's a blank page. And in my big book, in the 3rd edition, it's a blank page. And they just said, this is what you know about your life. And they said, not a fucking thing. And they turned that page and they said, this is what you know about Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was blank. And they said, not a fucking thing. And on the very next page, there's a circle and a triangle. And they explained to me that there was 3 dimensions to this program. And I needed to be an active participant in all 3 of those factions of this program: unity, service, and recovery. And I didn't do this program right. I was told to get a big book and a 12 and 12. I broke into the Easy Does It Club in Norfolk, Virginia, and I stole a case of big books and a case of 12 and 12s. I kept one of each. I sold the rest at the dance that Saturday night. And I sat in that room for 3.5 hours with a ball peen hammer. I beat the safe out of the wall, and I stole $3,000 that belonged to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the old timers told me to keep coming back. The old timers told me that I had a chance. This is the first place that anybody ever said, keep coming back for me. I didn't believe that I had a chance. And they said if I stayed in the first 164 pages of the big book, I'd never have a problem in my life. If I did what was written in the big book and written in 12 and 12, and I followed directions and I did what they did to stay sober, my life would change. And I didn't believe it in the very beginning. I didn't believe that this program was going to work for me. And I had a self-appointed sponsor. He was a one-legged jerk that lost his leg in Vietnam. He walked around in these metal crutches. He had one leg. I used to kick his crutches out from underneath him. I threw coffee cups, ashtrays, and people when I came to this program. I owe my life to this program. I really do. The old timers told me to stay in the first 164 pages of the big book. And they told me if I had any problems in my life, then I was supposed to work with somebody else. And I ended up going to meetings with this guy that I didn't like. And I'd call him this warm, loving sponsor that I have. And I'd call him and I'd tell him all these problems that I had about going to jail and having to come up all this money for the lawyers. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was still robbing people. He would tell me, go pick up Al and take Al to the meeting. And Al was a jerk. And I hated this guy. And he was a bigger liar than I was. He was a bigger jerk than I was. He was a bigger idiot than I was. And I hated this guy. I'd drive to his house in my stolen car that I lived in. I'd pick him up and put him in the car, and I'd listen to his BS all the way to the meeting. I'd listen to his BS all the way during the meeting. Listen to his BS all the way home. And for some odd reason, my life changed and I felt better. I felt better about myself. The old timers told me that I needed to do the steps. And I did the steps with my sponsor. And I was told to take the steps and apply the principle of those steps in my life each and every day. Well, one of my biggest pet peeves is I hear people say, work the steps and get a sponsor, read the big book, and pray. Big book says we take the steps. 2 paragraphs later, it says here are the steps we took. And that's what the old timers did. That they took these steps and they applied them to their lives. And that's what they were asking me to do, is apply these steps in my life. Take these steps and apply them to my life. I worked the steps with a sponsor. I sat down at this round table with him and I worked the steps to the best of my ability with him, with his guidance. And the things that I learned is what I applied to my life. I had a real hard time with God. When I decided that I wanted to have God in my life, I had to learn from a little 7-year-old kid flying a kite. And his kite was above the clouds. And I asked him, the stupidest question you could ever ask a 7-year-old kid is, how do you know your kite is still there? And he said, I can still feel the pull of it. And that's what I feel every single time that I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I still feel the pull of it. I came in here and I'd go to meetings and I would listen to people bring up topics of acceptance as the answer to all my problems today. So I became a parrot, and I used to walk around in rooms and I used to say that acceptance is the answer to all my problems today, even though I didn't believe it. My sponsor and these old timers sat me down and they said, acceptance isn't the answer to all your problems today. There is not a chapter in the big book that's called acceptance. There's a story in the back of the book that's written that talks about acceptance. And what they showed me was that they told me to read that whole story. And the thing that applies is the last 2 paragraphs in that story, where it says his acceptance comes from God, that I needed to have a dependence on God. And that's what I have today. I used to pray for people in this program. If I didn't like you, I prayed for you. big book doesn't say that. It says that if I have a problem with somebody, I open up the big book to page 63, 64, 65, 66, and I read what's in there. And it tells me that I'm supposed to do a moral inventory and look at myself. It's not about praying for somebody. It's not praying for that they get everything. It's about changing me. This program's about changing me. It's not about changing them. So I stopped praying for people. Today I ask God to teach me how to love, honor, and cherish my wife, so I can love, honor, and cherish all of you. I pray and I ask for God to teach me how to live my life today. I suffer from a spinal cord injury, and I broke my neck 4.5 years ago, and I lived. And sometimes I wonder why. My job isn't to wonder why. There's a program and there's a chapter in the big book that says into action. And that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get into action, help others clean house, and pass on what I've learned in this program. I've had some really great men in my life that have taught me everything. And I'll say this and I'll shut up. I had a friend of mine. He was a hobo. He was 50-some years old. He never worked a day in his life. He spent couple of years in the military. After he got out of the military, he hopped trains for all over this country, robbed and stole and broke into people's homes and did all kinds of stuff. His name was Donnie. Donnie had these piercing blue eyes, and Donnie knew who his God was. He wanted to get a job, and he went to the VA hospital to get a physical. He walked in that hospital, and he never walked out. Donnie used to call me on the phone. He said, "Rod, come hold my hand." And for the first week, I could go almost every day and hold his hand. And Donnie would talk about God. And he had these crystal blue eyes, and he would say that he knew who his God was, and I didn't know who mine was. The second week, Donnie would call me on the phone, and I'd go over there, and I'd sit down, and I'd hold his hand, and we'd talk. And he always wanted to talk about God. The third week, I only went over there once to hold his hand. And I knew if I ever went back that he would die in my hands. And I didn't want to do that. So the fourth week, when he called me on the phone, I made every excuse in the world not to go see him. And I never talked to my sponsor about it. And I never talked to the old timers in the meetings about it. Don died alone. He's buried in a pauper's grave in Hampton, Virginia. Nobody was there to ever claim his body. I did that to my friend. I don't ever want to do that to another man in this program. So when my phone call rings, I answer the damn thing. I'll stay up all night long drinking coffee to help somebody. My life has totally changed. I came in this program a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, whatever title you ever want to give somebody, that's who I was. Today, I'm married to a very strong, independent woman that's in this program. She just celebrated 5 years of continuous sobriety. I watch her sleep. I pray every day that God teaches me how to love her. She lost her son 2 years ago. It was a pretty difficult time for both of us, but God got us through it. He gave me the strength to do whatever I needed to do to support her and love her. God put her in my life. Why, I don't know. But I know that we have a sober home. I can cry in front of her. I can tell her how I feel. It's amazing to have a relationship with a woman that you don't have to throw things, argue, fight, or anything. We have never raised our voice in our home. We are just doing what's ever put in front of us, one day at a time. I have 39 years of continuous sobriety without a relapse, and that's not anything that I did on my own. It's what everybody in this program has done for me. Thank you for allowing me to share. It's a privilege and an honor.